So Gerda comes to the Snow Queen's palace, and the palace has walls of driven snow. And it talked about a nice knife sharp wind being the windows and the doors. Now, wind can blow very hard, and it can feel like a knife stabbing you when it gets cold. And so here you have sort of a metaphorical wind, though it could have been a literal wind that was just so fast and so hard it would block. Science fiction has the idea of a force field, which often is air being held like that by some force. Anyway, so it talks about this hall and how it was this beautiful place and bears could dance, but they didn't dance. And it talked about white fox vixens. Vixen is the name for a female fox. And so the story talked about them like sitting there drinking their tea, pinkies out, coffee. But anyway, gossiping and talking, and talked about the bears dancing or playing games, but it says that didn't happen. And then it talked about the lake in the middle, how it's a mirror. And this is a reflection of the first chapter, where it starts out with a mirror. So it starts with a mirror and it ends with a mirror. So this book ends the story, and that's a very common writing technique, where you start and you end with the same sort of thing. So here we are with the mirror, and the mirror is broken. And there are places where you have ice and it cracks. But because of how the ice cracks and forms, because of the forces at work, there's a particular distance that the wind and the waves will break the ice. And so if you have consistent conditions and the right conditions for long enough, what you end up with is this field of ice that's very, very regular. It's sort of rare, but you do see it, and you'll see pictures of it floating around the internet every winter or two, where it's like all of a sudden someone says, oh wow, look at this, it's just magic how this all breaks up. Well, no, that's just the physics, that you have this big area with the same forces applied across it, so it breaks in the same way. um so anyway, talks about the pattern, and the Chinese puzzle is probably something referred to as a tangram, which is a collection of triangles, a square, and a parallelogram. And they're different sizes. So you have a small triangle, and then you have a medium sized triangle, and you have two big triangles, and the parallelogram and the square. Two small triangles, medium, too big. And the big triangles, the medium sized triangle is half the size of the big triangle, and the little triangle is half the size of the medium sized triangle. So if you take the two little triangles and put them short end to short end, they make up the medium sized triangle. And you take the two triangles and you put them long end to long end, and it makes up the square. And if you put them short end to short end the other way, it makes up the parallelogram. Likewise, with the medium triangle, if you had a second one, it only comes with one, but if you had a second one, or you made it up with two little triangles, it makes the size of the large triangle. And then you can arrange all of these into a square, and it's really kind of fun. And there's a whole bunch of patterns that come with it. Typically, it's like, okay, make this shape. And you just kind of have a black outline, and you kind of guess how it goes, and then you can solution book that says, oh yeah, put it this way, that way, the other way. But it's commonly sold in a square set. Commonly see it in the square set. And anyway, that's a tangram. And so here you have Kay playing with this, trying to spell out a word. And it talked about him being frozen blue, almost black. Now, when people get frostbite, it does turn black, and that's a sign of the tissue being dead. But Kay, or Gerda, managed to miraculously bring him back to life. Burned up the piece of glass in his heart, and crying, he washed away the one in his eye. So he was back to normal. And it talked about the two of them walking home. And once again, they meet people in reverse. So they meet the reindeer. Then they meet the Finn woman, and they go into her sauna. I meant to talk about this with the last one, but talked about a room that was so hot that she was almost naked. Well, one of the popular things in Scandinavia is something called a sauna. And they have them here in the US. They have them any place it gets cold, which is a room where they keep it super, super hot. We're talking like 150, 180, and it's just super hot. And what you do is you go in there and you sweat and you sweat and you sweat. And it gets all of this stuff out of your skin because you just sweat all of this stuff out. And so what people do in these countries is they go into the sauna and they get hot and they get sweaty and they run out and they roll in the snow or they run out into the cold. And this is something that they do, and it's very invigorating and it's very refreshing. It's also kind of crazy at the same time, but what do you do? You're up north. What else is there to do? Anyway, so they warm up, and then they go to the lap woman, once again backwards, run into the robber girl, who's now grown up, a woman on her own. So this is the first sign that time has really sort of passed. Then they ask her about the prince and princess. Oh, they're married. They're off wandering. Good stuff. The crow, dead. Very sad, but his lady is still alive. Now, a few years ago, there was on the internet, on Facebook, a page called Canuck and I, where there was a guy who was friends with a crow. And so this crow was semi-tame. He would feed the crow, and the crow would come to him, and they would talk, and they'd take pictures, and then the crow had a lady friend. And so Canuck would come around, and the lady friend would come around, and they had baby crows. And then one day Canuck disappeared, stopped coming, and so they figured it died, which is sad. But anyway, the crow, and then they go back to the home where they started out, their hometown, and they go into grandmother's house, and there everything is still the same. The stools are there, the roses are there, and they realize that they've grown up. So they must have been gone for years. They probably have been gone for years, because you figure that Kay disappeared in the spring, or Kay disappeared in the winter. Gerda went out in the summer. At least a few months passed because it was fall when she left the garden. And now they must have gone through an entire winter. So it could have been a full year. It was at least a full year, possibly several, because we don't really know how much time some of these things took. And so that's sort of a thing with it. But anyway, so they go back home and they realize that they're grown up, but in their hearts they're still children. And that's something very important to remember, that to hold on to the goodness and honesty of being a child as long as you can. Don't grow up. Don't grow up unless you have to. And don't have to until. But be good, be honest. It's a good way to live.